Well, hello, Westside Church. Hey, it is good to be together today as we study through Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount and specifically the Beatitudes. And we're also covering these on the weekend as well. So make sure you're catching the weekend messages, tying it together with the daily devotions. It's a great way for us to be learning and moving together in this whole process. So we're going to be looking actually at a passage out of James chapter 1, verses 2 through 3 today, because they tie to Jesus' words in the Beatitudes, where he says, "Blessed are those who suffer, for they will be comforted." Really challenging passage, and especially this passage by James. I'm going to read it to us out of the New International Version, starting in verse 2. He writes, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." This is one of those passages that is really challenging, and as Pastor Steve talked about this last weekend, it's almost backwards. There's so much in this that is counterintuitive to our human nature, our natural desires, our natural inklings, and so I want to dive into this a little bit and see if there's some simple things we can pull out of it for our daily lives. First, James starts out and he uses the word consider. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. And it starts right out reminding us, hey, there's a decision to be made here. You may be going through a trial. It could be a big one, a small one. It could be something really, really tragic, painful. It could be one that's just frustrating and nagging or anything in between. But we have a decision from the get-go when we're facing and walking through trials to choose how we frame them. What do we really see happening there? It can be easy to frame them from the lens or through the lens of our own feelings and our disappointments or our pain or our feelings of betrayal or tragedy or whatever it may be. And we can so focus quickly on the negative, the loss, the bad side of things. And while we don't want to deny the realities of trials and what we feel and go through, that's an important part of walking through suffering in our lives. That's an important part of allowing God to work. But we also want to make sure that we frame them with good perspective about who God is while we walk through those trials. And so James reminds us, he says, consider it. You need to choose how you're going to consider this experience you're going through. Are you going to consider it as a loss and a tragedy that God has no control or help for? Or are you going to consider it as something that God may be able to use, may be able to work through to somehow bring good and beauty out of? And that's the key part to start with, is how we frame it, how we consider the trial we're facing. And let's face it, he says, we're going to face trials of many kinds. Jesus talked about that too. In this life, you'll have many troubles. And so it's a question of how we're going to walk through them. The psalmist writes about that in Psalm chapter 23. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Why? Because God is with me. And so this is not about necessarily trying to figure out how do we always avoid and walk around trials, but as we're walking through them, how will we experience them? How will we allow God to walk with us, to interface with us, to move in and through us during those trials? And James shows us, he says, hey, don't forget that when you're walking through trials, what's going to happen is your faith is actually going to be tested. It's going to be challenged, and that's part of what makes our faith real. Does it stand up under test? If it doesn't, then what good is it? But if it does stand up when challenged, then it's something powerful. And not only that, but it's something that continues to grow. Just like a muscle, when it's stressed and put to the test, it actually grows. It's torn down a little bit, but out in that tearing and that struggle and the pain of the muscle being used and worked out, for example, it actually grows and becomes stronger, more effective. And James says, hey, that's what's going to happen with your faith. If you'll let it, if you'll consider it joy, God will actually take trials. He'll use them to build your faith. He'll build this thing called perseverance inside of us, the ability to stick through. And it's in that sticking through that we are allowed and we're enabled to see God. We see him move. We didn't give up. We didn't run. We didn't just avoid it, but we gave it time. We gave God space and room to move. And it's then that we see God's powerful work. And out of that comes amazing things in it. And I love how James puts it. He says, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. It doesn't mean we won't go through hard things and have times of loss and pain, but in those things we gain something. We gain a maturity, a wholeness, a well-roundedness. I don't certainly have this mastered or figured out in my life, and I don't like suffering or trials. I prefer to avoid them. But I have to choose to, when I face things of trial, consider them joy. Allow God to do his work, because it is in that you and I actually grow. We become more mature. We become more complete. We become more like Christ. And in that, we end up in a place where we lack nothing. We lack nothing. And that's an amazing and beautiful place. So I hope that encourages you today, especially if you're walking through something of trial. Would you lean on God? Would you trust him? Would you reframe it and consider it joy and see what he does? God bless you. Have a great week, and I will see you soon.